After headlines swept the globe to indicate the sinking of the Royal Merchant ship, the R.M.S. Titanic would be the world's greatest ocean liner of its time that left over 1,500 passengers deceased, which did cause hesitations ensued about the luxury of traveling by ship. And lo and behold, the John Brown Shipyard in 1930 Scotland began construction of a tremendous beauty, halted during the Great Depression yet resuming interest quickly thereafter. In 1936, she was launched in what was considered the greatest achievement shipbuilding had ever seen, a craft bigger and faster than the R.M.S. Titanic. The ship endured a remarkable history, even appearing alongside Frank Sinatra in the 1966 film Assault on a Queen, in which a $1 million gold bust detonates the ship and a damsel in distress. Who would have thought that the vessel so luxurious, catering to only the most powerful patrons and upholding record speeds and distance, would soon bear the name of the Grey Ghost? Before succumbing to a haunting floating fate, here are 10 haunting facts about the R.M.S. Queen Mary. Number 10. Mystery behind the name. During the initial construction, the ship's name was kept a closely guarded secret, and no one was sure why. But one thing was certain, however, that during its christening in September 26, 1934, King George V and his wife Queen Mary of Teck appeared in Southampton, England, to pay respect to Britain's most proud achievement. To thousands of cheering onlookers gathered on the docks, the king gave a heartwarming speech and associated the name with his queen for the first time. Her Highness then cut the ribbon and broke a bottle of wine to honor perhaps herself and her floating counterpart. It wouldn't be until 2 years later that the Queen Mary would make her first ever voyage from England to New York on May 27, 1936. Number 9. A relationship with strings attached. In midst of the Great Depression, when the economy was at an all-time low, a deal had been struck. The British government would grant the loan and funds to continue to work on ship number 534, only if Cunard and White Star agreed to merge. The British shipping company Cunard had fallen on hard times, along with its counterpart White Star. Thus, in 1934, the famous owner of the doomed Titanic crowned the Cunard White Star line, and a $30 million price tag equating to $560 million today, which caused the goal to make a sister ship by the name of Queen Elizabeth, who would be built, and together her and the Mary would dominate transatlantic travel. Number 8. The Queen receives a makeover. After World War II, the Queen Mary underwent a lavish makeover to shed the remnants of her military duties while at sea. The upgrade required 10 months of renovation in order to restore the ship back to her grand reputation. To regain proper standards required for the commercial passenger service, the Cunard White Star line added extra berths in all level of classes, as well as standard air conditioning. And in July of 1947, the Queen Mary made her debut to the open sea once more, alongside her sister, the Queen Elizabeth, and continued an elevated level of popularity for the next 2 decades. Number 7. Power, size, and reputation. In an era in which France, Britain, and Germany scrambled over one another to become the top provider of illustrious transatlantic transport, 2 British companies, the Cunard and White Star, rivaled one another in terms of size, speed, and luxury. One British shipbuilder commissioned by Cunard and well famous for the Lusitania, which was torpedoed and sunk by a German U-boat in 1915, became hard at work for what was known only as hull number 534. Soon, the R.M.S. Queen Mary became one of the most powerful ships ever built, even larger than its predecessor, the Titanic, and just as elegant. The Queen Mary in its prime was called the finest ocean liner to cross the Atlantic. In fact, the vessel traversed this seventh sea approximately 1,001 times during her transatlantic reign in the mid-20th century. The ship's sheer size alone was enough to create a sense of wonder among the general public. At 1,018 feet long and weighing 81,000 tons, the Queen Mary was considered the largest ocean liner of her day. In fact, her rudder alone weighed 150 tons and was deemed the largest ever built. To compare, the Grand Titanic was only 883 feet long and weighed 46,000 tons. Aboard the Queen Mary was a massive 143-foot dining room that spanned the entire length of the ship. The room was large enough to host 800 first-class passengers at one time. This social area was also considered the largest dining room on any ship of that time. Underneath were 24 boilers and 4 sets of turbines generating 160,000 horsepower fueled 4 large propellers, which in turn moved at a whopping 200 revolutions per minute. This power alone ensured the ship upheld the fastest transatlantic speed record for 14 years. Number 6. Amenities fit for a god. Fred Astaire, Bing Crosby, Elizabeth Taylor, Audrey Hepburn, Desi Arnaz of I Love Lucy, Bob Hope, Queen Elizabeth II, and Winston Churchill were among some of the rich and famous to experience the luxury of the Queen Mary. And it's no wonder, with 5 dining rooms, 2 grand pools, an expansive ballroom, the dining and entertainment alone were enough to attract wealthy passengers to the ship's first-class accommodations. A first-class menu boasted of pastries, broiled kipper herring, and French onion soup gratiné. An Art Deco mural in the main dining hall featured a crystal model of the ship itself and tracked the journey from England to New York. The guest list boomed with royalty, Hollywood celebrities, and elite business gurus, as well as prominent political figures. But not all guests excluded glamour. In addition to first class, the ship had a tourist class, or first class followed by third class in the latter. The most cramped quarters were reserved for workers, with some rooms squeezing in 10 crew members per tiny bunk. Number 5. A 15-year-old world record. The Queen Mary held many impressive accolades, but among her most prized award was with the 1936 Blue Ribbon, an archaic term for ribbon. And in August of the same year, the vessel clocked in at over 30 knots, deeming the highest average speed ever to cross the Atlantic, a record voyage that crossed a distance of 3,000 nautical miles in just over 4 days. Her biggest rival was the Normandy. It seized this title momentarily in 1937, yet the victorious Mary nabbled back her title the following year and kept it well into 1952. It may be of no slight fluke that the Blue Ribbon candy, a delectable chocolate-covered wafer owned by Nestle, was developed in the UK during the 1930s. Number 4. Honorable Military Service. The Queen Mary had just completed a successful voyage to New York when she received a strict order from the British government. The order was that the ship was to stay docked at port until further notice, and it was soon determined by Allied forces that all 3 ships currently docked in New York were the Queen Mary, the Queen Elizabeth, and the Normandy. These 3 ships would undergo transformation and evolve into troop ships that were sent to deliver servicemen to various battlefronts. The Queen Mary was painted a foreboding gray, earning her the new ominous name of Grey Ghost. To prepare the ocean liner for unwarranted contact, the ship was ornamented in a disguising coil, which altered the magnetic field in order to avoid enemy mines. This form of protection deemed the ships as highly valuable troop ships, especially with the Queen Mary's capability of moving 15,000 soldiers at a time, earning her another honor of most people to ever board a vessel. Number 3. A tragic encounter. During World War II, the Queen Mary was given an escort, the R.M.S, Her Majesty's ship, the Curacao. Having survived the First World War, the Curacao was sent to join the Queen Mary for a rendezvous mission off the coast of Ireland. On October 2, 1942, the pair departed, the former on a straight course, and the Queen Mary on her usual zigzag route to ward off the pursuit of German enemy U-boats. The wayward nature of each other's course sent the 2 ships headed right for one another. A British sailor by the name of Alfred Johnson recalled the quote, "I said to my mate, I'm sure we're going to hit her. And sure enough, the Queen Mary sliced the cruiser in two like a piece of butter, straight through the 6-inch armored plating. Records determined that before crewmen could take necessary action, the powerful Queen Mary collided with the Curacao, cutting it in half and sending the victim ship straight to the ocean floor. While 100 men were rescued, the tragedy did take the lives of 337. Number 2. A floating fate. By the late 1960s, the famous Queen Mary had begun to exhaust her fame and fortune, as 30 years of popularity and travel signaled an end for the transatlantic ocean liner. The Queen Mary departed on her ultimate cruise on October 31st, 1967. After the Cunard line, reverting back to their pre-merger name, decided to sell the ship in the same year of December 9th, the vessel docked in Long Beach, California, where she remains as a floating luxury hotel, museum, and novelty, with an impressionable 3.8 million nautical miles under her belt, along with her war stories and Hollywood accolades. Not only does the Queen Mary have shopping, it has dining with 3 restaurants in it and its own foundation, the Queen Mary's Heritage Foundation, which aims to develop an educational facility that will preserve the ship's remarkable history. Today, the old gray ghost stands as a reminder of the past and as a beacon of life, or lack thereof, for all who venture near. Number 1. The Hauntings. The luminous floating vessel is known for ghostly wails and reports of frantic banging from the belly of the ship where it once tragically struck the Curacao, a sister ship sent to help perform military missions with the Queen Mary. Some have reported to staff that there's grave changes in temperature while they are in the boiler room. Others have seen a faint floating light or experienced the smell of smoke for no apparent reason. Pipes can be heard banging about, and some report the engine room door to radiate extreme and sudden warmth when all activity has been quiet for over 50 years. These moments have been accredited to several ghost sightings, including a visit from Spectre John Henry, a wartime sailor who died in an engine room fire at the young age of 17. A figure known as Half-Hatch Harry is consistently reported lurking around the boiler room near the infamous Door 13, a site often visited by a large figure in blue overalls and carrying a wrench. During a routine drill aboard the vessel, a ship-appointed fireman by the name of John Petter took his last breath while being crushed by the daunting Door 13. There is speculation, however, to the story over how a massive door requiring 60 seconds to close could cause a man to get trapped within its steel. Nonetheless, curious ghost hunters have reveled in the story, administering 24-hour surveillance cameras at said door to keep a constant watch of any unsuspected paranormal activity. In other accounts, angry customers reported a cook aboard the ocean liner that served food so horrible it caused his untimely murder by soldiers who pushed the chef into his own oven. Despite the unrealistic nature of this story, there were always several chefs present and no written accounts from military personnel, passengers, and tourists. None have reported screams coming and protruding from the oven. The story has proven so thrilling that it inspired a Queen Mary Halloween maze in which daring ticket holders pass through the kitchen in a weaving frenzy. Another report is of a spirit given the name Dana of the Dead, and she is heard calling for her mother by the second-class pool. The child apparition had been seen playing in the archives and cargo areas as well, calling to her mother when any intruder comes near. In another case, a young girl and her father were found dead in the bathroom suite of room B74. The pair were fatally shot, while the girl's sister and mother were found strangled to death in their beds of the same room. The family's tragic fate is figured to be a murder-suicide and separate of ghostly revelations, yet it is added to the ship's eerie evolution and fascinating history.